I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome to the ACSU full board meeting tonight. We'll start out with introductions, starting with Suzanne Buck.
Jason Hoffman, Middlebury.
Reporting Middlebury. Middlebury. D Flag Shore.
Introduce yourself. Harry Hansen.
Carol Ford.
Ryan Alexander, Ripton. Mark Perrin, Middlebury.
Peterborough Superintendent.
Rick Scott, UD3 Bridport.
Eric Bowdish, Weybridge.
John Newseater, Salisbury.
Christy Felici, Cornwall. Sarah Kemp, Cornwall.
Dave Hamilton, Cornwall.
Catherine Shaw, Salisbury.
Gary Brown, Salisbury.
Lorraine Morris, Middlebury.
And if we could pan over to the audience too, I'd like to have folks introduce themselves as well.
John Konakowski, of also Bridport.
Lucy Wells, Director of Student Services.
David Boucher, Business Manager.
Tom Russell, Maryhood School Principal. Joe Lawson, High School Principal.
Jerry Shedd, UD3. JP Reese, UD3.
Kelly Hesketh, Student Rep.
Scott Sebo, Middle School Assistant Principal.
Jen Travis, Cornwall School Principal. Jennifer Green, Bridport Principal. Fernanda Canales, Salisbury Community School Principal.
Mike Lennox, Shoreham Principal.
Warren Devon, Cornwall.
Jim Travis, teacher, Mary Hogan.
Susan Lewis, Associate Director of Student Services. Laura McIntosh, North. Tracy Aaron, Resident Elementary Principal.
Vance Wood, Sean.
Patrick Green, Middle School Principal.
Victoria Jetty, and Fort Ward.
Steve Worzak, Middlebury.
Okay, welcome again. Do we have any public comment this evening? Okay. Do I have a recommendation to approve the minutes of January 5th, 2016?
So moved.
All in favor? Okay, election of officers. We're going to start with chair. Yeah,
Could you please explain for us why we're doing this tonight and not at our annual meeting?
sure. So this year, with the change from the ID4 election of officers from May to March, in reviewing statute, we are required within 30 days of the last member district's election of officers to elect officers to ACSU, Supervisory Union. It's 16 VSA 262. I caught it in reviewing for our annual meeting and realized we should put it on tonight's agenda. So that's why it's there. Okay, so we are open for nominations for chair of ACSU full board.
Nominate Rick Scott.
Second. Sorry, okay, whatever. Who did that, please? Eric? And,
Chris. Seconds aren't actually required, but they show endorsement of a candidate. Okay.
That's with tradition.
Move that we close nominations.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
You got a motion.
To close nominations, a motion to elect Rick Scott as chair.
Sure, I'll move it.
Okay,
I
second?
thought Chris already did. Wait a minute.
Second.
Oh, yeah, second.
Yeah. We're nominating them, we're electing.
I second.
Okay. All in favor? We had,
Moving kind of faster.
people are moving me fast.
So here are the closed nominations, and I got Mark
Yep.
Okay, so
Yep.
then what was,
Move to elect.
Yep.
Elect Rick Scott as board chair.
you moved to elect?
Ruth and Dee Dee did.
Yeah,
One second.
whatever. Peter's making us go through these weird motions, Lorraine. so
I'm trying to be as officious as possible.
Roberto's rule of support is working.
All vote, Peter, let's go.
All right. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to Bridport. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Bridport Board, for putting this on for us. Very nice. Vice Chair, can I have a nomination for Vice Chair, please?
Nominate Chris Eden.
Thank you, Mark.
Second that.
Okay, Judd. Any other nominations for Vice Chair? Hearing none, we'll close the nominations. All in favor of Chris Seaton as Vice Chair, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. Congratulations, Chris. And for Clerk? I'm sorry. How come we're not voting for you?
I think the same thing happened last year.
We like to use the same format. I think that we need to make that official, so we're going to revise the minutes to reflect the need for a clerk and accept nominations for that position.
I nominate Lorraine.
Thank you.
That many seconds is automatic, close
We
nomination.
don't need to vote. Lorraine, you want to nominate someone else? All right, any other nominations? Hearing none, we'll close that. All in favor of Lorraine Morse for our clerk, say aye. Aye. All right, congratulations and thank you, Lorraine. Moving on to the report of Superintendent of Schools. Peter, the legislative update, please.
Okay. Well, this year, it's been the quietest year thus far for me in terms of legislation and education. I think because of all of the work around Act 46 at the beginning of the session, we really haven't seen much happen other than legislators kind of trying to figure out what they're going to do with spending caps. I talked at our last meeting about, I think in our local district meetings, about the PICUS report. Committees are studying that report and looking at ways to curb spending in Vermont. The big finding out of that report was an over-reliance on paraprofessionals in Vermont. That's kind of the main thing that I'm hearing from the legislature that they're honing in on, and that is in the area of special ed at the moment. But that was kind of one of the overarching findings from that PICUS report. I did send that out in a board communique. I would suggest that you take some time. It's incredibly dry, but it's good background knowledge to have, especially because my experience is that the state will continue to riff on that report over the next number of years. So it's good in terms of being engaged in the conversations happening at Montpelier to have that information yourself. The VSA, the Vermont Superintendents Association, is really pushing the legislature to not do anything else with education in this session. And they've focused on both Acts 166 and Act 77. So there's a big push to really get the legislatures to see what some of the complications are in the legislation that they've already passed, so that they don't further complicate the work that we're trying to do. So far, I think they've been mostly successful in keeping the number of bills coming out of Montpelier to a minimum, and not trying to disrupt the work that we're trying to accomplish, especially those supervisory unions that are moving from many districts to one district, and the amount of work that's involved with that. Second thing I wanted to talk about was the ACSD organizational meeting. I have a couple slides which I'm going to talk off of. So there have been a lot of questions about what's happening in, we might need to save this.
You got the lens cover is closed also on that. It's not on.
Got power here.
Is it
Hey, while we're doing that, let's back up the agenda and elect a treasurer and assistant treasurer. Is that all right? Or-
Yes.
Okay. Pardon me?
At this time?
Do you want to save that for the annual meeting? Was that your suggestion?
I thought so, yeah.
All right.
I'm wrong.
It's on the agenda, just following the rules, man.
So as this heats up and gets moving, I sent out, let's stand here. Over here maybe? This work? It's not my picture. If you've been wondering where you want to go on vacation, this is a really good choice.
Let's zoom in.
Sorry about this. There we go. Beautiful. So, in the board packet, you received information which really talks about all the different things that are happening from the vote to our organization meeting. And a lot of that was information for us, for the central office to be working on in preparing for that organization meeting. The time period between now and the organization meeting, we really are in status quo. Our current boards are continuing to do the work that they've been doing. The new board does not yet exist. So that new board will come into, ACSD will come into existence when the Secretary of Education comes to our community and essentially forms the new school district. And in your packet, you also had a number of articles from an organization meeting in Essex Westford. So if you remember, Essex Westford is just ahead of us. They went through the red process. They're now unifying. And you can see the articles that will be covered at our first organization meeting, most likely at the end of May. There's not a lot of business that happens at that first meeting. It's primarily pomp and circumstance. We set an annual meeting. We determine potential salaries for board members. We elect a moderator, a clerk, a treasurer, and there are a couple other items on that organization meeting. After that organization meeting, the board then begins meeting, and that's when we can start having conversations here about the transitional period that we're currently in. So the work of the new board, I wrote up here the big three. These are the three big things that the ACSD board will be working on. And it's going to be a very interesting period because we have most of our current board members that are here today are also on ACSD board. So part of what I think we'll be working on together, both with our current boards and our new ACSD board, is figuring out what is the work of the current board in this transitional period. What does the meeting calendar look like? What is the communication looking like between the current board and the ACSD board? to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page and knows exactly how we will be dealing with all of the issues that come up beyond these, I think, big three items that we've established leading up to the formation of ACSD that we know they'll be working on, which is the budget for FY18, salary negotiations, which become effective with the formation of the new school district board on July 1st, 2017, and working on policy. And I did want to, if I could, just ask Jerry to speak briefly to policy currently and what the policy committee might be doing.
Sure. I talked to Jason briefly about this. Jason Duquette-Hoffman is the only member of the current policy committee, or the outgoing policy committee, who is also on the new board. So he's the obvious point man, and he's willing to take on this responsibility. Whether or not the ACSU board feels that it needs a policy committee going forward now is an open question. One possibility for you would be to establish a policy committee with Jason as the chair, and then that policy committee go to work only if it's needed. What might well be that there will be no work for that committee to do. But Jason would also be the obvious person to be the point man for policy on the new board, because obviously one of the big three is policy. The new board will have to establish a policy manual, so Jason would be the person to do that. Does that answer the question?
So the other thing that post-organization meeting that will be very important for the new board is board training. This is going to be a new body, and it's going to be important to come together and really kind of discuss and figure out how things will operate together, what my relationship is to the board. Not that necessarily will change dramatically, but setting up the structures and systems for the new board to make it as efficient and as powerful as possible. So it's in transition. Administration will also be working alongside board members in looking at how do we take all of our budgets and combine them into a single budget. What does that look like? What does the structure of the software look like? There's a lot of work on the finance end. There's also work in terms of looking at our strategic plan and funding for that strategic plan in our new budget. There's also community outreach that we really need to continue to push on. And one of the things we heard throughout the process of moving to a single unified board was what happens to community and how does community stay connected to our schools. And so part of our work in this transition, I think, is going to be not only continuing to foster what we have, but trying to grow and think about, as we're forming this new structure, how do we make sure that community is as connected or more connected than they are right now. So that's I think a key priority in moving forward. So that's kind of it in a nutshell in terms of where we are now and kind of leading up to organization meeting and right after. Are there any questions that anyone has that I can answer? Good.
Good. Thank you, Peter.
Did we approve the minutes? We did? Okay. Sorry, it's asleep at the wheel. Not at the wheel.
We will revisit treasurer. In the interim, I looked at our bylaws, and the treasurer is an officer, so we may as well elect the assistant treasurers in keeping with Title 16, Chapter 7, Section 262. We got to do it right. But let's go on to report of the board and get back to treasurer after that. So this ties in with what Peter was just speaking of, and I'm going to hand it over to him shortly. The Negotiations Council, just as an update, there is, as many of you are aware, a regional negotiations council that's in formation. That a region at this point involves the three Addison county school districts and Rutland Northeast, with the hope that that would expand through the Rutland area as well. The intent of that is to align the boards in a common area of thinking about what contracts should look like and what our priorities are. And that's ongoing work that will transition to the SD as that happens, but I don't think we want to walk away from that right now if that's the pleasure of this board. I'm not going to put a vote out there, but if someone wants to discuss it, we can do that. Part two of that is local negotiations. There is a committee of the ACSU that is a local negotiation council, which we have a meeting scheduled next week, which again, without objection from this group, will continue that process until we're at a point to hand that over. I think that it's been made clear to us that it's important that this process is ongoing and we don't wait, especially in this year when we've got such a big challenge, or when the SD will have such a big challenge ahead of them in creating a unified contract. Discussion, questions, comments? Jason?
Can you remind me who's on the committee?
I can try. I am on there. Perry's on there. Mark is on there. And Christine Gibson from Quorum is on there. And Lorraine is from ID4. Gary and Sarah. I think I've got everyone.
Just trying to get a sense of who's on the committee that's also going to be on the
I think that's Perry and Lorraine, yeah.
And Mary.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris, yeah.
Perry, Lorraine, and Chris were the
Yes.
three.
Yeah. Which is a pretty good-sized committee for a board of 13. Just saying. Peter, you have anything you want to add to the?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it makes sense to continue the local negotiations council until the new board is formed and not wait 2 months in the interim to keep that movement happening and the development going, especially because we're nearing time where we're going to really need to be talking about it. And we do tonight. Gail Leach, who is our payroll and benefits coordinator at the SU, it went to the VHI meeting, which we all missed because we were here. So she's taking notes, and I'll be communicating with all of you about what I find out in regards to that meeting. This is, if you don't remember, it's a kind of tour of Vermont that VHI is doing, presenting the new plans, answering questions, and helping to contextualize what this new environment looks like and how it's different. The questions I've had for VSBIT, and I haven't gotten an answer on yet, is in terms of a dollar amount, how far away are the new plans from what we're currently offering? We know they're saying they're not a Cadillac plan, meaning you can't get what we have now, that's not possible. So we know there's a difference, but I want to know what the dollar amount is, especially as we look at negotiations. And we know that is going to be probably the central thing we're going to be negotiating this coming year, or right now.
Other questions, discussion on negotiations? All right, hearing none, we'll go back up to the middle of the order and take nominations for treasurer and assistant treasurer, as long as we're doing it. Who is our treasurer currently? Is it Michelle Warren?
Is it Jane?
Is it Jane?
Jane. Yeah.
Okay. Mark, was that a nomination?
Was that a nomination for Jane Beck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a nomination for Jane Beck for treasurer. We don't need a second. Any other nominations? All right. All in favor of Jane Beck as treasurer, say aye. Aye. Thank you. Assistant treasurer, is that our business manager currently?
I believe it is, yes.
I believe so, yeah. Yes, Lorraine says.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're nominating business manager for the assistant manager. Okay. Any other nominations? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right. Thank you very much. Other business? All right, we'll close this out and we'll move into general session. 62.
Okay, we're ready? Okay. Does anyone need to take a break, or? No?
So if anybody wants to have any food before we go into executive session, because Janet would like to clean up, so she can go home.
Thank you, Ms. Piper. That was delicious.
Yeah, let's give a round of applause.
mouse failed.
Did it fail?
Mouse doesn't work.
It wasn't working. Actually, you know what? It probably works with PowerPoint. It wasn't working with my thing. But
Okay.
it would probably work.
Okay.
I'm gonna leave.
Right. So, welcome. Louder? Oh. So, welcome, and we're going to talk about ACSD, and you'll see in here it's ACSD, it's ACSU. I started to write ASCD versus ACSD, so I think I just went back to ACSU, which is what I know right now. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of student services and some data that goes along with that, and then I'll leave time at the end for some questions. But I want to start with the context of special education. Prior to July 1 of 2013, the Supervisory Union coordinated the provision of special education services. Now, because of centralization, the Supervisory Union provides special education services. So prior to 2014, staff were hired by their own schools. There were still some shared staff, but they were hired by their schools. They were budgeted at their schools, and the responsibility of that provision was at the school level. With the passage of Act 153, several years ago, we brought student services, special education, to central office. It was required by law to centralize those services. So now not only do we coordinate, but we provide. So all of the professional special education staff are housed at the central office. We hire those staff, and most staff are still where they were. Paraprofessionals are still at the building level, because paraprofessional use is very, very different between and among the different schools. And for the budget, it is in consultation, a lot of consultation with the principals based on the needs of students. When I build the budget, I take a look at every single student in the Supervisory Union, what their needs are, how they're dispersed across the Supervisory Union, and try to budget based on what we anticipate we think is going to happen next year. We anticipated back in October, and I can tell you it's already shifted. So, and then our costs are assessed to schools based on equalized pupils. So instead of each school holding their own budget, we hold the budget at central office, and the costs are assessed out. So I want to start with our littlest population. I feel like I'm like in front of you guys. I'm going to start with our littlest population, our early ed kiddos. Sorry. And I have 2 years of information from the early ed program. So for the 2014-15 school year, which was last year, our early ed program, we have an early ed program housed at Mary Hogan that provides classroom services, and we also have service providers. We have speech-language pathologists as well as special educators and some paraprofessionals that provide services. Last year, we served a total of 73 students between the ages of 3 and 5. 29 of those students were served in outreach locations, which is either at home or at a community-based program. We had 9 being served in our public schools, which is either Salisbury, Ripton, or Bridport, and I didn't put specific schools in there because the numbers were so low. And in Mary Hogan, in the actual early education program, last year we served 35 students. Of those 35 students, 31% of them were eligible to receive special education services, and 69% were considered at risk. And when we look at gender, we served last year 80% of the students that we served that were eligible for special ed were male, and 20% were female. That'll come up again. In terms of their, did I miss a year? Nope. In terms of screenings, last year we screened students ages 3 to 5 2 times officially throughout the year, and if there is a need for a student to be screened, and a student moves in, pediatrician sees a student for the first time, we will screen if that's necessary. Last year, we did 28 screenings of 3 through 5-year-olds. This year, to date, we have done 17, and there were a few kind of in the queue at this point. And then if a screening shows that a student has the risk of a developmental delay, we move on and we do an evaluation. And to be eligible for special education for 3 through 5, you need to have a 40% delay. So when you're thinking about a 3-year-old with a 40% delay, that's a pretty significant delay. And so 19 evaluations last year, 90% of those new evaluations were eligible, remain eligible. 70% of reevaluations, which is what every 3 years a student is due for a reevaluation, 70% remained eligible, which means, though, that 30% of the students who were eligible got services are no longer eligible. So for this year, we have 12 that we have started, and again, there are 7 in process. 100% of the new evaluations are eligible, which could mean 2 things. It could mean that we're picking up the right kids at the right time, and that people aren't referring students who are not going to be eligible. When they refer, there's a clear eligibility there. And then 75% of the reevaluations remain eligible, which again means that 25% are no longer eligible.
Does that just mean they no longer delayed?
They no longer are at a delay where they require specialized instruction and meet the criteria. Yep, and some of them we still follow to make sure that if they're in the at-risk category, we still follow. So for the 2015-2016 school year, this current year, we are serving 61 students. That is to date. Usually we pick up 2 to 3 more students each month because they don't turn 3 on September 1st all the time. They turn 3, during, and we pick them up when they turn 3. We're serving 35 in outreach, and again, that's either at home or in childcare settings, and those settings are within the supervisory union. There are 7 in our public school programs. Right now in our early ed program, we're serving 22 students. 32% of those are eligible for special ed services and 68% are at risk. And this year, the male population is 70% and female population is 30%. Just checking to see that the ACSD is right. So I'm going to move on from early ed, and we're going to take a look at the 6 to 21 population.
Vicki, before, in regards to the early ed, for eligibility, I understand the special ed eligibility, is there also diagnostic criteria that need to be met? And if so, is there diagnostic sort of like areas, or is there, for lack of that term, labels? And if so, what categories are you finding most prevalent?
So for early ed, it's different than it is for 6 to 21. For early ed, it's developmental delay either medically or at significant risk of school failure. So we have a lot of kids come in with medical conditions. We have some kids come in who there's some potential cognitive delays and some that have some social and emotional needs. So as long as it's within one of those areas and it's the 40%.
Any sense that there's any one of those 3 categories that's higher in terms of the number of students than the other?
That I would have to take a look at. Yep. And for the 3 to 5-year-old population, the net is wider. Birth to 3, the net is really wide. The 3 to 5-year-old population, it's a little bit narrower than the birth to 3 net to catch kids. And then once we move to 6 to 21, it becomes even narrower in terms of the criteria that kids need to meet in order to be eligible. So our centralized budget, and I apologize that you can't see it that well. There's no percentages, there's no dollar figures attached to it, but I wanted to show you kind of how it's dispersed. We have a total budget this year of $4,966,059. It's a 2.3% increase over last year's, over the 15-16 budget, so this is anticipated for next year. And if you can see up there, salaries are the most significant cost in purchased paraprofessional services. So like I stated earlier, paraprofessionals are still at the school, but when they provide special education services to students, the central office special education budget reimburses the school for that cost for any services provided for special needs students.
Vicki?
Yep.
How much of that tuition chunk is within the SD? How much would one school pay for another within the SD?
So that tuition chunk is outside of the SD at this point. Yep, because next year, some of what used to be called tuition isn't called tuition.
Vicki, the para, that grade, that's for pairs that are identified in an IEP, right?
Yes.
Okay, and you don't know the numbers, but that cost in pairs to our overall system compared to all the others, do you have a sense of where that is?
I don't have the budget in front of me, but that's about a fifth of the budget there. And the way that we do it is a paraprofessional needs to be identified in an IEP, and we get schedules from them twice a year, and we allocate their time based on those schedules. Is it in the schedule, is it special education, and is it in the IEP? So before I went specifically into special ed, I wanted to give you the supervisory district at a glance so that you could get a sense of the enrollment, the percent of students on free and reduced lunch, along with the percent of students that are currently on plans, whether it's an IEP. We have 504 plans, and we have educational support team plans. We also have language acquisition teams. Those are our students who are English language learners. And this was taken 2 weeks ago off of Power School, so these numbers may have shifted some between now and then, but you can get a sense of the differences between some of the places that are 14, 15% poverty and some of the places that are 64% poverty. But overall, we have a 36% poverty rate in the supervisory district. We have 33%, 1/3 of our students are being served by some type of a plan, whether it's IEP, 504, or EST. And then 30, that's high, 35%. We don't have 35%.
And it's sort of rolling and we don't know what comes next, or is this sort of representative of what we typically see?
I would say, given the numbers that I looked at over the last couple of years, this is pretty typical. And usually after third grade, we start to get more and more students eligible because that's when we start to see some pretty significant discrepancies.
Is 12th grade, where are the kids that are in year 13, 14? Are they lumped in the 12th grade?
They're in the 12th grade, so anybody who's like, yeah, it should have been 12 plus, yeah.
Is there a shifting in the category when you, I mean, if you have your first graders and then by the time they're in sixth grade, you see an increase, I'm assuming that's not helped.
Right. And I would have to go back and look specifically, but the triple E to kindergarten is that developmental delay category, so it's very broad. Once they hit age 6, there's 13 or 12 other defined categories. We start to see 4th, 5th, 6th grade, a lot of students with learning disabilities. So learning disabilities and emotional disturbance tend to be the ones that we start to see in the higher elementary grades.
Is this like across the state as well?
That I don't know. That I tried to get the 2000 or the December 1, 2015 data from the state for child count. It's not ready yet, and I didn't want to compare this year's data to the state's last year's. Percent by gender. I put boys in blue. We have, it's about 73% male and the rest female. That is very consistent not only across the state but across the country, that it's typically 2/3 male, 1/3 female that are identified.
you want to talk about what the rationale is, or the reasoning is behind that, or?
I was actually listening this afternoon to an NPR, they were talking about autism, and they were talking about how mostly boys are identified with autism, but the research is based on the boys who have been identified, and so the girls who are identified and have autism don't have the same characteristics as boys. So in essence, if you're only looking at boys who have autism and girls aren't showing those characteristics, you don't have kids with those disabilities. And when I was working at the State Department, there really isn't a specific answer to this. A lot of the thinking behind it is that girls show disabilities in different ways, or have better coping. We don't know why there's a clear gender line.
Isn't that also true, at least in some of my reading, regarding attentional or focused problems? Is that males tend to display attentional and focused problems physically, whereas, again, this is a problem in autism, whereas females tend not to. So identifying, again, just going back to what you were saying, is that if you're going to diagnose somebody based upon characteristics and you're not seeing those characteristics, then that could be.
In a lot of the research that I've read in the past, and I haven't done it recently, is males are more external in their behaviors and therefore identify more. So to give you a quick overview of evaluations, and it is through evaluations that we determine students eligible or not eligible for special education. And the evaluations are comprehensive evaluations, because when we put a category on a student, when we put a label on a student, we want that documented and justified, so that we go through a pretty significant process to determine, is there a disability? Does the disability have an adverse effect? Is there then a need for specialized instruction? Because once that label goes on, there are a lot of times that when they get reevaluated after 3 years, they're eligible. 3 years later, they're eligible. So we want to make sure if we're going to put a label on a student that we're really careful and we have the data that we need in order to justify that decision. So for 2014-2015, this is the first year that we were centralized. We developed a centralized evaluation team. So Susan English oversees the work of that team, and it has a special educator and a school psychologist. And this year we were able to appoint 2 speech-language pathologists on the team. That has created significant consistency across the supervisory union in what information they're looking at, how they determine disability, adverse effect, and need, and the documentation of such, because it was all over the place prior to 2014. So last year, the eval team did 99 evaluations. 30% of them were initial evals, which meant that a student was referred for the first time for a special education eval. 67 of them were reevaluations, which meant that they had been eligible before and it's their 3 years. And then 2 were transfer students. Anytime a student transfers into the state of Vermont on an IEP, we have to redetermine eligibility in the state of Vermont, because different states have different criteria. So by the end of all of those evaluations, we had 33 students, so about a third of the students evaluated were found ineligible or were exited from special education. That's awesome. So 15 of those were initial evaluations that the student was referred, the team did an evaluation, student didn't meet the criteria. 16 were reevaluations where kids had been previously eligible and were not eligible at their 3-year evaluation time. And the 2 transfer students who moved in were no longer eligible. Right now, we have 133 evaluations that the eval team is doing. 25 of them, and that's scheduled, they always pop up. 25 are initials, 73 are reevals, and 5 are transfer students. And again, out of those, 19 were either determined ineligible or were exited from special education. Yep.
Does that mean, though, Vicki, that they don't necessarily need some sort of support services?
They most still need services, they just don't need the intensity of special education. So often, if there's a disability but no adverse effect or need, they may be referred to the 504 team, or they may be referred to the educational support team for additional supports and services. And then outcomes. And outcomes, Silas St. James, who is our literacy secondary curriculum leader with an expertise in literacy, with a focus on literacy, did the UD3 annual report and really took a look at all of our SBAC data, which is the first time last year that the students took the Smarter Balanced assessment. And I focused only on 7th grade and above, because when you get into the elementary grades, we're looking at 1 or possibly 2 students, and I didn't feel it was appropriate to put their scores up here. So we're looking at 7th grade and knowing, we'll start with 7th grade, 8th grade, and then 11th grade ELA and math, knowing that this is a product of our entire system, that it is not, at the 7th grade that students score well or not well. It's a product of the entire system. So for grade 7, ELA, and again, I'm sorry you can't really see, the blue, so the first 2 are Vermont, and it's regular ed students in Vermont and special ed students in Vermont and how they scored on the 7th grade ELA. The second is our middle school 7th graders. Regular ed is in blue, special education is in green. And in essence, regular ed students scored, this is average scores, but on average scored at or above proficiency. Special ed students, pretty below proficiency in ELA.
Can you read the percentages? Because
I don't have the percentages. The cut scores are up there, and the proficiency cut score is 2552. Our middle school regular ed students were at 2599. Our special ed students were at 2457. This is 8th grade. Let me flip so I can read this. For the middle school, we scored higher in regular ed than on average as the state, and lower on average than the state in special ed. And the proficiency cut score here is 2567. Regular ed students were at 2617. Special needs students were at 2442. So this is grade 11. The cut score here is 2583. Regular ed students on average 2611. Special ed students on average 2448. And in part, by definition, in order for a student to be eligible, they have to be significantly below their peers. But a student may be significantly below in reading and fine in math, or significantly below in math and fine in reading. It really depends on a student-to-student basis. And this didn't come out very well. So I'll skip that. So reading, again, this is grade 7. The cut score is 2567. Regular ed students at the middle school had a cut score of 2587. Special needs students, 2406. Grade 8 math, again, regular ed performs or outperforms the state, and special ed numbers are closer. Proficiency score of 2652, and for the regular ed students, it's 2628. For special needs students, it's 2414. And that's the one that I just read. So we're significantly below grade age peers, and at this point, much lower than the state as a whole in terms of our overall outcomes. So one of the things that I did want to state is as I looked at this, I have been going around also for the past couple of months talking with each and every special educator about priorities for next year, because we've been looking at our comprehensive system of services for all students, and we've been looking at service delivery models. And I'm starting to look more carefully at staffing, given that this year alone, Mary Hogan has gotten 18 or 20 new students with special needs that were not anticipated at not only last year, but at the start of this year. And so our numbers are shifting on a pretty continuous basis. So we're taking a look at what is the staffing that's appropriate to staff schools to meet the needs of all the kiddos, but especially those with special needs. And how do we start looking at more specially designed, specialized instruction for students with special needs so that we can bring the scores up and our outcomes will look better. And so we've been talking a lot individually and as a group about how to go back to the intent of special education, or think about the intent of special education as specially designed instruction to meet the needs of the individual student. And how do we do that in a way where the highest needs students get the skill information and the skill training from our highest qualified adults. And then another graph you can't see, sorry.
So Vicki, does that go back to the excess of paras as opposed to getting para help as opposed to getting educator help?
Yeah, and we're taking a look at how paraprofessionals are used. The state did a study around paraprofessionals. We're taking a look at that and really taking a look at when do we need a para, what is the best use of that para, and how can they best support the students.
If there are students on Title IVs or ESTs, is that information available in the same way that IEP students?
We can get that, we can dig that out, we can go through, it'll take a lot longer to do that, but Silas was able to pull it out because of the way that he ran the data. We can pull out by plan, by status, so we can certainly run that and see if that's any different.
Is there a different success story there?
My initial thinking would be that there is, but we'd have to run that and take a look. Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the criteria changing as a child goes older, like at age 6, the criteria is different, so it drops down? Do you think that's creating a situation where children who need services are not getting them just because they reach age 6?
I don't think so, no. I think our schools are set up that every school has what's called an educational support team, and any student that has needs, if a teacher feels it's necessary, goes to the educational support team. So there's a number of, from regular classroom services, there's a number of interventions and other services that are available to students prior to getting to the level of really needing specialized instruction.
And then is that criteria established by the district or by the state?
It's federally regulated, and then our state adds their own twist to it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It made me curious to look at how many of those kids that were found ineligible, are any of them found eligible 3 years down the road? So I just would be, that would be one way to answer that question, I think.
Yep.
Is to think about, looking at that group that became ineligible and tracking them and finding out what happened to them.
Yep, and I know, and it's not, I don't have the data in front of me, but from hearing from people, there are a handful of students who become ineligible in kindergarten because they no longer meet that criteria, who by 3rd or 4th grade become eligible again.
It'd be interesting to find out percentages,
Mhm.
just for my own
Yep.
curiosity and figuring out how well we're doing by those kids.
Right,
in the
right.
future. Yeah.
Yep.
So the kids who are receiving special ed services, they're reevaluated every 3 years.
Yes.
But if someone goes through an evaluation and they're deemed ineligible, are they evaluated again, conceivably the next year?
They are not evaluated again unless they're referred again.
But they
So
could be referred.
They could be
the next
referred
year.
again. Yep, we've had some, we've had some that they're referred in 3rd, they're referred in 4th, they're referred in 5th, then,
Yeah.
yeah. Yep. Yes.
So I know one of the conversations we've been having at ID4, you mentioned the 18 students who came in who we didn't expect at the beginning of the year. And they're not only, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but they're not only students who have potentially special education needs, they have other social needs. A lot of them are homeless, a lot of them have parents who are not able to be there for them, whether because of drugs or because they don't have good jobs or whatever it is. There's other extenuating circumstances that are sort of beyond special education. And I mean, I know that the State Board of Education just came out with some report talking about, or a recommendation talking about needing this sort of wraparound services, full services for students. And I don't know what my point is here, except for that there's so much more to this picture.
Yes.
You did have the correlation of the federal poverty or the free and reduced lunch rates, but there's a correlation often with these other situations in students' lives, and some of it we can address in school, and some of it is a little bit beyond school.
This is
a sort of full societal community.
Yeah, this is a small
response to this.
slice, and I think part of the way that some schools are addressing that is by having school-based clinicians, behavioral interventionists in the school to start that wraparound. There are some students who are also eligible for what's called a 264 for students who have some pretty serious emotional issues, and it's 3 agencies coming together to look at the student, look at the family, and help provide some services. So we wrap as much as we can, and we're often sitting at the same table with Agency of Human Services and Department of Children and Families to really look what else is necessary for kids and for families, and what can we do to support them. That's not just in the 6.5 hours of a school day.
Right, and this came up at our town meeting in Middlebury. We got this question because we were seeing an increase in students and wanting to know like an appropriate community response to the fact that we're seeing more and more needy kids. And I mean, we're in Bridport, and you see the numbers in Bridport, and knowing that there are tons of needy kids here as a percentage of the kids, and just needing to be able to communicate and talking about, reaching out to our communities, to communicate to our communities about the needs we're seeing in our students that are beyond educational needs, and what we all need to step up and do for our students and for our families in our town.
And we have some established partnerships that we're continuing to grow, but I think what we recognized is it's really hard to work with other agencies and work together seamlessly to drive all those resources to the student. That there's a lot of getting together, meeting, talking, coming to a consensus, then going back to your organization. And unfortunately, a lot of our organizations run really differently. I think as we move forward and we look at all these issues that we're confronting, we've got to approach this differently than we always do, which is, we've all been to those meetings many, many times, and a lot of great people coming together that really care, but the eventual outcomes of those meetings are often not there. So I think looking at Addison County, we have some of the best resources in Vermont, and everyone acknowledges that in the state. When I go to Montpelier and elsewhere, people say Addison County is the place where some really cool stuff is happening. So I think we have the potential, connected to community support and bringing resources in to shift that model so that it's not this agency versus that agency, but it's really, we figure out a way to connect these together a little bit more coherently than we have. I think that really needs to happen. I think that's the work.
Vicki, can you give us a quick update on the status of the transition of the diversified occupations program to an ACSU?
So the work group is still in session. We actually met with the 2 facilitators today to get a sense of where they are and what their next steps are. And they are working right now on some bullet points for us to be able to put out on the website so that people will get a clear understanding of where they are. So it's still in process, but my understanding is that some great work has happened. Yep.
Other questions? Special education?
Sorry to to follow on that, the diversified application program, I should know this, is that going away?
No.
Okay.
So we were part of a consortium, a collaborative, which is by statute, supervisory unions can partner and really at a discount run specific kinds of programming. So part of our collaborative with 3 other supervisory unions, Northeast, Northwest, and Rutland Northeast, was the establishment of the Diversified Occupations Program in 1970, let's say. 78?
Somewhere in 78.
Okay, I think it was in the 70s. So that collaborative has been running for a long time. There were, long ago, many diversified occupations throughout the state. Those no longer exist, but we still have a really thriving and strong program in Middlebury. We have been the administration of the Diversified Occupations Program, but other schools have sent students. It got to the point where 2 of the 4 supervisory unions that are part of the collaborative were no longer sending students to diversified occupations, and it made sense in looking at ACSU and a system of services to really take on and own the program as part of the ACSU system of services. So that the board made that decision last year to essentially allow ACSU to take on diversified occupations, and out of that was conversations about how does the diversified occupations program fit into the high school and the system of services at the high school. So a work group was formed with folks from the high school, with folks from DO, central office, and we've had 2 consultants working with this group to really look at kind of all of those different kind of options and opportunities in now having a program that before was an isolated program that was housed at the high school but wasn't part of the high school. Now it's part of the high school. So that really changes, I think, kind of the way that we see the program. And you know, if any of you took part in any of the forums or have been connected to the kind of the outpouring of support for DO, I know many folks came to our meeting in Weybridge and discussed their experiences both as parents and administrators of diversified occupations. So we're building on, I think, an incredible amount of support for DO in moving forward and now having it as an ACSU program. So that work group is I think finishing up and kind of determining what will, you know, the kind of opportunities be for next year with the Diversified Occupations Program.
Is that it? Thank you, Vicki.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Any other business? Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.